Imagine a misty dawn in 1823 South Carolina, where the fog clings like guilt to the cotton fields. A grand plantation awakens to empty shackles, blood-smeared papers, and 7 souls vanished into the night. But this isn't just escape, it's retribution, born from a wedding vow twisted by greed and unholy ambition. What if the gift of love was 7 lives to break? Feel the dread. It's coming for them all. In the shadowed annals of American history, where the magnolia-scented air of the antebellum South masked the rot of human bondage, there lies a tale so steeped in moral decay that it whispers of biblical curses and eternal reckonings. This is the story of Colonel Elias Hawthorne, once a pillar of Southern aristocracy, now a ghost haunting the ledgers of forgotten sins. His name, etched in faded ink on crumbling deeds, evokes not glory but a divine hammer poised to strike. For in the year 1822, amid the opulent sprawl of Hawthorne Hall in Beaufort County, South Carolina, a matrimonial pact was forged that would unravel a dynasty, echoing the fall of Babylon with its hubris and horror. It began not with overt violence, but with the subtle poison of ambition, where love curdled into ownership and human souls became pawns in a game of profit and power. This narrative, pieced together from unearthed letters, court fragments, and the oral laments of descendants, reveals a web of betrayal that challenges us to confront the spiritual cost of empire building on broken backs. As we delve into this chronicle, feel the weight of judgment, not just earthly, but perhaps celestial, pressing down like the humid night air before a storm. Picture the landscape, vast expanses of emerald cotton undulating under a relentless sun, their white bowls like surrendered ghosts harvested by calloused hands. Beaufort County in the early 19th century was a kingdom unto itself, where wealth flowed from the soil, soaked in sweat and tears. The air hummed with the low chants of field songs, masking cries of despair, while grand mansions rose like ivory sentinels, their verandas alive with the clink of crystal and a murmur of deals struck in cigar smoke. Here, the elite aped European nobility, hosting balls where silk gowns swirled and fortunes were bartered. Yet beneath this veneer lurked a spiritual void, a defiance of the commandment to love thy neighbor, twisted into dominion over thy bondsman. Colonel Elias Hawthorne embodied this paradox, a man whose life was a testament to calculated conquest, but whose soul teetered on the abyss of damnation. Hawthorne cut an imposing figure, towering at 6'3", with steel-blue eyes that pierced like bayonets, and a mane of silver streak hair framing a face etched by battlefield scars from the War of 1812. His uniform, still donned for formal occasions, bore medals that gleamed like false halos, earned in skirmishes where he commanded with the precision of a chess master. Those eyes, cold as winter iron, missed nothing. The yield of a crop, the flicker of defiance in a slave's gaze, or the potential profit in alliance. His voice, deep and resonant, carried the timbre of authority, honed on parade grounds and now wielded over his domain. Friends, and he had many among the powerful, praised his unyielding principles, loyalty to kin, ruthless efficiency in business, and a faith professed in Sunday pews, but seldom practiced in the fields. Yet whispers among the enslaved painted him as a pharaoh, building his pyramid on their bones, blind to the plagues that might follow. Hawthorne Hall sprawled across 4,500 acres, a self-contained empire where rivers snaked through fertile deltas, feeding irrigation ditches that sustained the Cotton Kings. The main house, a neoclassical behemoth with Corinthian columns and wrought iron balconies, overlooked manicured gardens bursting with camellias and azaleas, their petals a stark contrast to the thorned realities beyond. In the quarters, ramshackle cabins huddled like forgotten prayers, housing over 250 souls whose lineages traced back to auction blocks in Charleston. Hawthorne's ledgers were infamous. Leather-bound tomes detailing not just names and ages, but bloodlines, aptitudes, and valuations adjusted with the market's whims. A blacksmith's hammer arm might add $200, a healer's knowledge of roots and poultices, $150 more. It was a system of commodification that echoed the biblical sale of Joseph by his brothers, betrayal for silver, family ties severed for gain. Hawthorne saw it as stewardship. History judges it as sacrilege. Into this world stepped Miss Arabella Voss, Hawthorne's betrothed, a vision of Southern grace laced with serpentine cunning. At 24, she hailed from a venerable Georgia clan, her family's Savannah estate rivaling Hawthorne's in splendor. With porcelain skin, raven hair cascading in ringlets, and emerald eyes that sparkled with intellect, she moved through society like a siren song. Educated in the classics by private tutors, she quoted Virgil and Plato at teas, but her true education came from her father's counting house, where she learned the arithmetic of human trade. The Voss fortune, amassed through cotton and the interstate slave market, had inoculated her against empathy. She viewed people as assets, their suffering a line item in the balance sheet. In courtship letters, preserved in a hidden trunk discovered in 2018, she wrote to Hawthorne of optimizing yields through innovative husbandry. Her words clinical, devoid of the warmth expected in love notes. Their engagement, proclaimed in the balmy spring of 1822, sent ripples through elite circles. Invitations to announcement soirees flooded from Virginia planters to Louisiana sugar barons, promising a merger of might that could sway elections and tariffs. Hawthorne, ever the strategist, saw in Arabella not just a wife, but a partner in empire, a Delilah to his Samson, though he mistook her ambition for strength. Their meetings unfolded in the dappled light of Hawthorne's orchards, chaperoned by discreet servants, where conversations veered from poetry to profit. "Tell me of your overseer's methods," she'd inquire, her gloved hand tracing a peach's fuzz, her tone casual yet probing. Hawthorne, flattered by her acumen, divulged secrets, rotation schedules, punishment logs, breeding incentives designed to swell the workforce. What he failed to discern was the shadow in her soul, a hunger for control that bordered on the demonic, as if she sought to play God in a garden of enforced Eden. As wedding preparations crescendoed, the estate buzzed like a hive. Artisans from New Orleans crafted silverware engraved with intertwined crests. Ships from Europe docked with crates of Bordeaux and damask linens. The event, set for mid-October, promised extravagance. A 3-day fete with fireworks, quadrilles under starlit skies, and feasts of roasted quail and pecan pies. Guests would arrive in convoys, their horses' hooves thundering like approaching judgment. But in the velvet hush of private evenings, as fireflies danced outside leaded windows, Arabella unveiled her true desire. It came during a supper in Hawthorne's study, a chamber of mahogany panels, globes spinning with conquered lands, and shelves groaning under tomes of law and war. Rain lashed the panes, thunder rumbling like heavenly disapproval, as she set down her fork and fixed him with those piercing eyes. "My dearest Elias," she began, her voice smooth as aged bourbon, yet edged with steel. "Our union is more than hearts entwined. It is fortunes forged. I wish to prove my worth beyond the parlor." What followed was a proposition that chilled the room's warmth. She requested, as her wedding gift, absolute dominion over 8 specific enslaved souls. Not 7, as rumor later twisted, but 8. A matriarch skilled in midwifery, her husband a master carpenter, their 4 grown offspring, 2 sons of iron strength, 2 daughters of nimble fingers, and 2 young grandchildren, innocents yet to be scarred. They form an ideal cohort, she explained, unfurling a vellum sheaf of notes, her handwriting elegant as a noose. The elders hold traditional crafts, the youth untapped potential. I have studied treatises from the Indies, methods to refine obedience, enhance output, dissolve distractions like familial bonds. Her Voss Protocol, as she dubbed it, drew from shadowed sources. Dispatches from Haitian overseers, Brazilian physinologues, even forbidden texts on phrenology and mesmerism. It outlined regimens of isolation, reward-punishment cycles calibrated to break spirits without breaking bodies, and selective pairings to breed superior stock. Biblical echoes abounded. Lot's daughters in twisted legacy, Pharaoh's taskmasters amplified. Hawthorne hesitated, the fire's crackle mirroring his inner turmoil. Southern custom granted wives sway over house servants, but field hands? Independent ownership? It upended patriarchal order, hinting at Eve's temptation in the garden. Yet greed whispered seduction. Cotton futures were volatile, rivals innovating with machinery. If her trial succeeded, profits could soar 30%, securing their legacy against economic floods. Nights blurred into debates. The couple hunched over maps redrawn to isolate a distant corner of the estate, a forsaken barn repurposed as the annex, veiled as a weaving shed. Legal machinations followed. Hawthorne summoned Silas Granger, a Beaufort attorney with a reputation for sealing scandals in wax. Documents were drafted in candlelit secrecy, clauses ironclad. Upon vows exchanged, the 8 would pass to Arabella's sole purview, their fates shielded from prying eyes. A chilling addendum, at her insistence, allowed disposal if experiments failed, echoing Cain's mark, but without mercy. Hawthorne rationalized it as progress, a marital covenant blending love and ledger. But in quiet moments, as owls hooted omens, doubt gnawed. Was this innovation or invitation to wrath? Word like smoke seeped out. A eavesdropping valet, a misplaced letter. Rumors stirred among the quarters, where the 8 dwelled in dread. The matriarch, known as Mama Ruth, whispered prayers from psalms, sensing the gathering storm. Guests arrived under azure skies on October 12th, 1822, carriages crunching gravel like bones. The pavilion, draped in ivory tulle, hosted the rite. Arabella ethereal in lace, Hawthorne stern in epaulets. Vows rang hollow against the spiritual undercurrent. The priest's benediction, a thin veil over impending sin. The gift reveal came at the banquet, tables groaning under candelabras in crystal. Hawthorne rose, glass aloft, his toast a masterpiece of deception. Beloved kin and comrades, he intoned, the crowd hushed. Tradition bids jewels or steeds, but Arabella craves true partnership. I bestow upon her stewardship of 8 prized souls, selected for their virtues, to pioneer advancements in our shared prosperity. Murmurs rippled, admiration from magnates eyeing efficiencies, unease from the pious like Reverend Josiah Cain, who saw echoes of Sodom's bargain. Arabella beamed, detailing frameworks for loyalty in dulcet tones, her enthusiasm masking the abyss. Festivities unfurled, waltzes under chandeliers, laughter echoing as champagne bubbled. Yet in the annex's gloom, the 8 were herded like lambs to slaughter, chains clinking, families torn asunder. Ruth's cries pierced the night, a lament for lost innocence. As revelers toasted, the seeds of retribution took root, divine justice stirring in the windswept fields. This was no mere wedding. It was a pact with perdition, where greed invited ghosts to the feast. But the true horror lay ahead, as days bled into indulgence. Hunts by day, masquerades by night, subtle fissures appeared. Dr. Harlan Thorpe, a visiting physician, overheard Arabella's musings on eradicating sentimental attachments, his brow furrowing at the godless calculus. Whispers among servants carried to the quarters, where plans fermented like forbidden wine. The 8, confined in straw-strewn cells, endured initial assessments, measurements of limb and lung, interrogations probing loyalties. Arabella, in crisp writing habit, oversaw with detached zeal, her journal filling with observations. Subject 4 resist separation, apply isolation to foster compliance. It was a laboratory of the soul, stripping humanity layer by layer, inviting the specter of rebellion. Hawthorne, amid the merriment, felt a spiritual unease, a prickling like Job's trials beginning. Dreams plagued him, fields aflame, voices crying for justice. Yet ambition blinded, as it did Judas for 30 pieces. The celebration peaked on the third eve, fireworks blooming like fall stars, guests departing with tales of grandeur. But as carriages faded, the estate settled into ominous quiet. The eight's plight deepened. Rations have to test resilience. Bonds severed through forced confessions. Ruth, drawing on ancestral faith, etched scriptures into the dirt. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, a prophecy taking form. Unbeknownst, a network stirred. A freedman courier, sympathetic to the quarters, carried word to abolitionist contacts in Charleston. Rumors swelled of a bride's dark arts, a colonel's complicity. The air thickened with portent, thunderheads gathering as if heaven itself prepared indictment. Hawthorne and Arabella, in nuptial bliss, plotted expansion, her protocol to all 250, a dynasty fortified. But sin's shadow lengthened, echoing proverbs, pride goeth before destruction. Then came the vanishing. On a fog-wreathed October morn, patrols found the annex breached. Doors ajar, shackles discarded like shed skins, a lone parchment stained crimson with what Tess revealed as pig's blood, a symbol, perhaps, of sacrificial lambs no more. Inked in defiant script, the gift returns to sender. No bodies, no trails, just absence, pregnant with mystery. Panic gripped Hawthorne Hall. Searches scoured swamps. Rivers dragged. Arabella's fury was biblical. Jezebel scorned. Authorities converged, the document dissected. Not escape, but orchestrated exodus, hints of underground aid. The fallout reshaped Beaufort. Hawthorne's prestige crumbled. Allies distanced, whispers of curse. Arabella, unbowed, doubled overseers, but yields faltered, as if the land itself rebelled. Spiritual reckonings followed. Hauntings reported, apparitions in the fields, Ruth's voice in the wind. The dynasty teetered, fortunes eroded by lawsuits and boycotts. In letters later unearthed, Hawthorne confessed doubt. Have we invited the Almighty's ire? Redemption eluded. Their line faded. Mansions razed by time. This chapter, the genesis of doom, teaches of hubris's cost, where wedding bells toll for souls and divine justice waits in the mist. Yet the tale deepens, threads of betrayal weaving tighter. Subscribe for the unraveling. Share your locale below. What shadows linger in your history? Deep in the tangled heart of Beaufort County's pine-choked wilderness, where the air hung heavy with the scent of resin and decay, a structure loomed like a forgotten sepulchre, a monument to human hubris and the slow grind of infernal cruelty. This was the annex, rechristened from its humble origins as a tobacco-curing shed into a laboratory of the damned. Its weathered planks, scarred by decades of sun and storm, now concealed horrors that echoed the biblical torments of Job, where suffering tested the soul's endurance not for redemption, but for profit. By winter's grip in 1822, Arabella Hawthorne's Voss Protocol had taken root here, a serpentine scheme that twisted marital vows into chains of dominion. The 8 souls, once a family woven tight by love and shared toil, now faced a reckoning that blurred the line between earthly oppression and spiritual warfare. As frost etched patterns on barred windows too high for hope, the winds carried faint echoes of lamentations, as if the land itself mourned the perversion of God's creation. This chapter unveils the abyss of Arabella's methods, where ambition masqueraded as innovation, and the seeds of divine justice began to sprout from soil soaked in tears and guilt. Visualize the path to this hellish outpost, a serpentine trail winding through ancient pines, their needles carpeting the ground like a shroud, muffling footsteps and secrets alike. 2 miles from Hawthorne Hall's gilded facade, where laughter and lantern light spilled from balls and banquets, the annex squatted in isolation, a squat, rectangular beast with reinforced timbers that groaned under winter gales like the bones of the weary. Modifications, executed in secrecy during summer swelter, had transformed it. Iron bars crisscrossed windows set 8 feet aloft, denying even a glimpse of the outside world, as if to blind the captives to God's sky. Interior partitions divided the space into cells. Cramped chambers with dirt floors packed hard as stone, walls oozing dampness that chilled to the marrow. The air inside reeked of mildew and despair, punctuated by the metallic tang of restraints bolted to beams. At the core lay the refinement chamber, a room of nightmares. Wooden stocks that locked limbs in agonizing contortions, whips coiled like vipers on hooks, and a table strewn with instruments, prods, clamps, and needles that evoked medieval inquisitions rather than antebellum efficiency. Flickering oil lamps cast long shadows that danced like demons, illuminating Arabella's ledger, pages filled with notations on resistance thresholds and compliance yields, her script elegant yet cold as a gravestone inscription. The family ensnared in this web. Mama Ruth, her husband Uzziah, their 4 grown children, Elias, Miriam, Caleb, and Leah, and the 2 grandchildren, young Abel and little Eve, embodied the very essence of resilience that Arabella sought to shatter. Ruth, in her mid-50s, with hands gnarled from years of midwifery and herbcraft, had delivered countless lives under moonlight, her knowledge a balm against plantation ills. Josiah, broad-shouldered and steady, forged tools in the smithy, his hammer strikes ringing like defiant psalms. Elias, 29, bore the strength of oxen in field labor. Miriam, 27, wove fabrics with fingers nimble as spiders. Caleb, 25, tended beasts with a gentle wisdom. Leah, 23, sang lullabies that soothed the quarters. The children, Abel at 8 and Eve at 5, represented innocence unscarred, wide eyes reflecting stars, laughter like birdsong in the dawn. Bound by blood and faith, they had endured auctions and overseers' lashes, drawing strength from Ruth's whispered Bible tales of Moses parting seas, David slaying giants, and Christ's mercy for the meek. Their unity was their shield, a testament to Proverbs' wisdom that a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Yet Arabella viewed this as inefficiency, a sin against productivity, ripe for excision like a thorn from Eden's garden. Her protocol commenced with isolation's blade, severing connections as ruthlessly as Salami's dance claimed John's head. Each was confined to solitary cells, doors bolted with locks that clanged like judgment's gavel. Communication forbidden, save during monitored toil where eyes dared not meet. Meals staggered, Ruth fed at dawn's gray light, her tin plate of cornmeal mush and wilted greens sliding under the door with a scrape that echoed loneliness. Josiah at noon, under the pale sun filtering through cracks. The others at intervals designed to erode solidarity. Transgressions, a whispered word, a longing glance, invoked collective punishment. One starved, all hungered. One lashed, all bore the welts in spirit. The air thickened with unspoken accusations, as Arabella sowed discord like the serpent in Genesis. To Elias, she'd murmur lies. Your sister Miriam blames you for the family's plight, saying your weakness invited this. To Miriam, Elias has confessed your disloyalty, begging mercy at your expense. These fabrications festered like wounds, breeding mistrust where trust once flourished, mirroring the biblical fracturing of Joseph's brethren through envy and deceit. Yet her crowning abomination was affinity trials, competitions that perverted familial love into a crucible of guilt and dread. Pitted against kin in grueling tasks, forging iron under time duress, weaving quotas in dim light, tilling mock plots with blunted tools. Victors earned scraps, an extra blanket against winter's bite, a sip of water untainted by salt. Losers condemned not only themselves but loved ones to torment. Abel's failure might mean Eve's isolation in a darkened corner, her cries piercing the night like arrows to the heart. The chamber's echoes amplified every grunt, every failure's gasp, turning bonds into burdens. See how your sloth damns them, Arabella would intone, her voice silky as silk yet sharp as thorns, evoking Pilate washing hands of innocence. Guilt gnawed deeper than hunger. Elias, outpacing Caleb, would hear his brother's suppressed groan, feeling the weight of Judas' betrayal. Spiritual undertones haunted these trials, Ruth murmuring prayers for forgiveness, sensing the protocol as a mockery of Calvary's sacrifice, where one suffered for all. Winter's cloak amplified the agony. Days shortened to twilight gloom, nights endless voids where cold seeped through cracks like accusing fingers. Snow dusted the pines outside, muffling the world, while inside, discomfort reigned supreme. Rations calibrated to sustain life but starve the soul. Porridge thin as gruel, portions doled with precision to induce perpetual craving, wielded as carrot and stick. Beds were pallets of straw infested with vermin, blankets threadbare against drafts that whispered of abandonment. Sleep fractured by deliberate disturbances. Overseers' boots thudding at odd hours, lamps flared to jolt from dreams. Exhaustion blurred minds, making psyches pliable as clay. Yet in this forge of suffering, something alchemical occurred. Not breakage, but hardening. Like Shadrach in the furnace, the family's faith tempered, evolving from passive endurance to smoldering resolve. Arabella's daily inspections, flanked by her brutish guardians, hulking men with scarred knuckles and vacant eyes, became rituals of observation. She'd pace the cells, quill scratching observations. Subject 3 exhibits diminished eye contact, progress toward submission. Interviews in the chamber, probing questions on loyalties, rewards for denunciations, punishments for defiance. Her gown, pristine amid the filth, symbolized detached divinity, a false god playing with mortal threads. Unforeseen, this crucible birthed rebellion spark. Isolation bred ingenuity. Caleb tapped codes on walls, Morse-like rhythms mimicking heartbeats, conveying plans. Hidden notes scratched on bark passed via meal trays. They mapped the structure. Weak planks in the east wall, keys hung carelessly on hooks, overseers' habits. One dozed post-meal, the other feared the dark. Spiritual sustenance fueled them. Ruth's memorized verses from Revelation, promising the fall of Babylon's tyrants, ignited hope. By February's thaw, their feigned compliance masked a conspiracy, eyes meeting in fleeting defiance, hands brushing in coded assurance. Meanwhile, ripples spread to Hawthorne Hall's quarters, where shadows lengthened with rumor. The family had been pillars. Ruth's herbs healed fevers. Josiah's tools mended plows. Their unity a quiet rebellion against despair. Their vanishing bred unease, like a plague's first cough. Elder Naomi, a wizened cook with silver braids and eyes sharp as hawks, emerged as sentinel. From the kitchen's hearth, amid sizzling fat and herb scents, she eavesdropped on parlor talks. Arabella's boasts of refined assets, Hawthorne's uneasy praise. Her status as matriarch drew confessions. Workers whispering of wagons laden with chains, screams carried on night winds like banshee wails. Supplies noted. Surgical blades glinting ominously, stocks of laudanum for forced calm, crates of irons branded with crests. Sounds haunted dreams, prolonged wails fading to silence heavier than lead, evoking lamentations cries over Jerusalem's fall. Naomi convened vigil circles, clandestine gatherings in moonlit clearings, circles of bowed heads feigning prayer but exchanging intelligence. Ims masquet discussion, fier voiced. Details memorized like scripture. The Lord's vengeance cometh, Naomi intoned, drawing from Isaiah, fostering unity amid diversity, African rhythms blending with Baptist refrains. These circles preserved testimonies. Accounts of the annexes glow at midnight, overseers' drunken slips revealing the ladies' games. As spring whispered renewal, passivity yielded to action, tools hidden, routes scouted, alliances forged with sympathetic freedmen beyond the gates. Beyond the quarters, white society buzzed with sanitized intrigue. Neighboring planters sought audiences, share your wife's wisdom. They'd implore over brandy, envisioning replicated protocols boosting yields. Arabella preened, her salon discussions veiling cruelty in economic jargon, positioning herself as pioneer. Pressure mounted. Success would crown her, failure, disgrace. Hawthorne, torn by guilt's pricks, nightmares of Judgment Day, yet lured by profit, urged haste. Spring's advent in March 1823 brought balmy breezes and planting frenzy. Fields furrowed under azure skies, air alive with bird calls and whip cracks. For Arabella, it heralded validation, reintegrating the 8 into the workforce, their transformation on display. But transformation defied her design. Elias, once fiery, now channeled rage into strategy. Miriam's songs became coded signals. United in shadow, they embodied the oppressed awakening, like Spartacus, but infused with gospel fire. The catalyst, March 17th's final severance essay. Arabella decreed Eve's permanent removal to the hall. Visible to Leah, but untouchable, a tantalizing torment to test eradicated bonds. As overseers approached, boots thudding like doom, the family stood ready. Leah's cry shattered the air. No more. Not impulse, but orchestration. Tools seized from shadows, bodies surging as one. Chains snapped, fists flew in a whirlwind of retribution. Blood splashed walls like sacrificial offerings, screams blending triumph and terror. In that melee, sin's fruit ripened. Overseers felled, doors breached, the 8 vanishing into pines under cover of dusk. Alarms rang, but too late. The oppressed had invoked their own exodus, leaving the annex a tomb of failed dominion. Hawthorne Hall awoke to chaos, patrols scouring swamps, dogs baying futilely. Arabella's ledger, stained and torn, revealed her hubris. Hawthorne's face ashen with dawning regret. Rumors exploded. Divine curse, slave uprising's omen. The dynasty cracked, alliances frayed, crops blighted as if by locusts. Spiritual echoes resounded. Apparitions of the 8 in fields, whispers of repent on winds. Naomi's circle swelled, seeds of broader resistance taking root. Arabella, unyielding, doubled guards but fear gnawed. Had she awakened heaven's wrath? The tale spirals deeper, guilt's noose tightening. What retribution awaits? Hit like if this chills your soul. Subscribe for the descent. From whence do you watch these shadows unfold? The morning broke soft and golden over Hawthorne Hall, the kind of deceptive Carolina spring light that makes magnolias glow like halos and hides the rot beneath. Arabella Hawthorne rose from silk sheets, kissed her husband with the cool detachment of a woman already planning her day's ledger entries, and stepped into a pale green riding habit that matched the new leaves outside. To the field hands already bent over plows, she was simply mistress, a distant queen in the great house. To the 8 souls waiting 2 miles deeper in the pines, she was Jezebel, Herodias, and the serpent in the garden all in one. And on this morning, the scales were finally tipping. She walked the familiar path alone. Her 2 overseers had not answered the bell from the annex at dawn, and Arabella disliked waiting. The scent of dogwood and resurrection fern filled her lungs. Somewhere a mockingbird sang the same 3 notes over and over, as if rehearsing a dirge. In her gloved hand, she carried the small leather notebook that cataloged 5 months of progress. Page after page of neat columns. Days until first breakdown, resistance extinguished, affection metrics trending toward 0. Today was the final entry. Today little Eve would be torn from her mother forever, and Arabella would prove that even a child's love could be cauterized for the sake of profit. She smiled at the thought. The South would thank her one day. She never heard the pines stop whispering. The annex door stood ajar, an impossibility. Arabella's pulse quickened, but only slightly. She had designed every lock herself. She stepped inside. The first thing she saw was the blood, not sprayed in panic, but painted, deliberate, almost ceremonial, across the whitewashed wall in the shape of a crude cross. Beneath it, her 2 overseers lay side by side on the punishment table, throats opened with the precision of men who had spent winter months studying anatomy on themselves and each other. Their eyes stared up at the rafters in perfect, lifeless symmetry. One still clutched a broken shackle like a rosary. Then she saw the family. They stood in perfect silence, arranged in the exact positions they had occupied during 1,000 morning inspections, except now their wrists were free, their eyes clear, and every face carried the same terrible calm. Mama Ruth held the Bible she had somehow kept hidden for 5 months. Josiah gripped the blacksmith hammer that had once forged their chains. Elias and Caleb flanked the door like silent sentinels. Miriam cradled little Eve against her hip, and Leah stood beside her brother David, who held Arabella's own punishment ledger, now annotated in charcoal margins with scripture verses and a single recurring phrase. "Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord." David spoke first. His voice was quiet, educated by months of listening to Arabella's lectures on efficiency and human management. "Mistress Arabella," he said, tasting the title like spoiled wine, "we have been waiting. We have a presentation for you." What followed was not murder born of frenzy. It was an inquest. They walked her through the building she had designed, room by room, as calmly as she had once walked them through torment. Every restraint, every whip, every isolation cell had been labeled in charcoal with dates, names, and the exact effect it was meant to produce. Her own journals, seized, copied, annotated, were laid out on the central table like evidence at a trial before an unseen judge. They forced her to read aloud passages she had written in candlelit pride. Subject 6, Eve, age 5, exhibits persistent attachment to maternal figure. Recommend permanent separation to eliminate inefficiency. Subject 1, Ruth, still prays aloud. Increase sleep deprivation until divine reliance is replaced by dependence on reward schedule. Each recitation was answered by a member of the family reciting, from memory, the cost in tears, blood, and stolen childhood. When she tried to speak, to bargain, to threaten, David simply turned another page. The verdict had already been reached long before she walked through the door. They did not rush her death. They gave her the same measured cruelty she had perfected, the slow, deliberate application of pain calculated not to kill quickly, but to allow understanding to bloom. The last thing Arabella Hawthorne saw was Mama Ruth's face, serene, terrible, maternal, leaning close enough to whisper the 109th Psalm against her ear as the light dimmed. By the time Colonel Elias Hawthorne reached the annex at 2 o'clock, spurred by a growing unease that felt suspiciously like dread, the trial was over and the sentence carried out. He found his wife seated in the punishment chair she had commissioned from New Orleans ironworkers, wrists and ankles locked exactly as she had once locked others. Her riding habit was soaked crimson, but her eyes were open, fixed on a single sheet pinned to her chest with a farrier's nail. In David's careful hand it read, "The gift is returned. With interest, tell the South what becomes of those who make merchandise of souls." Around her, the building had been transformed into a cathedral of accusation. Every instrument labeled, every journal copied in multiple hands, and sealed in oilcloth packets addressed to abolitionist newspapers in Philadelphia, Boston, and London. One packet was already missing. The family was gone, not fled in panic. They had taken nothing but the clothes they wore, a single water skin, and the Bible Ruth pressed her breast. They had left behind order, evidence, and a silence so complete it felt like the hush after the trumpet of doom. Hawthorne's first instinct was suppression. Riders galloped to Charleston, Beaufort, Savannah, summoning the inner circle of planter aristocracy who had toasted Arabella's innovative methods at the wedding. By nightfall, the great house swarmed with men whose grandfathers had written the laws that kept 200 souls in bondage. They came expecting damage control. They left pale and shaken. The evidence was too thorough, the copies too numerous, the implications too vast. They burned the annex that night, watched the flames consume modified stocks, labeled whips, the punishment chair with its silent occupant. They scattered the ashes into the creek and swore oaths on family Bibles to bury the truth. They crafted the official story. Mrs. Hawthorne tragically killed during a sudden slave insurrection. Perpetrators captured and executed without trial. 7 fresh graves were dug on the edge of the plantation, empty but marked with names. They thought that would end it. They were wrong. In late April 1823, the first packet reached William Lloyd Garrison's desk in Boston, then another in New York, then London. Then a fourth slipped into the hands of a Charleston freedman who carried it north on a schooner flying false colors. Each contained meticulous diagrams of the annex, verbatim excerpts from Arabella's journals, and, most damning, letters in her own hand to neighboring planters outlining plans to franchise the Voss Protocol across 3 states. The abolitionist press exploded. Pamphlets carried woodcuts of a beautiful Southern bride seated in her own torture chair beneath the caption, "Behold the Christian Lady of South Carolina." Preachers thundered from pulpits about the blood guilt of a nation. In London, Parliament heard the details read aloud, while peers who owned West Indian plantations shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Back in Beaufort County, the planter aristocracy turned on Hawthorne like wolves on a wounded alpha. Business dried up overnight. Banks called in notes. Cotton buyers found urgent reasons to purchase elsewhere. Invitations ceased. At church, pews mysteriously filled when he approached, forcing him to the back like a leper. Whispers followed him through Charleston streets. There goes the man whose wife tried to improve on Pharaoh. By autumn, Hawthorne Hall, once the jewel of the Low Country, stood mortgaged to the hilt. Field hands worked under triple guard, yet yields plummeted as if the soil itself refused to cooperate with cursed hands. Strange fires broke out in the barns. Tools vanished. Overseers quit, claiming they heard children crying in the wind. And always the rumors. 8 figures seen walking the moonlit roads. A woman's voice singing hymns in Gullah at the edge of the swamp. Footprints leading to the creek where the annex ashes had been scattered, and no footprints leading away. Colonel Elias Hawthorne lasted 3 more years. He was found at dawn on All Souls' Day, 1826, hanging from the same live oak that had once been festooned with silk ribbons for his wedding. In his pocket, a single sheet of paper bore 8 names and 1 line in a hand not his own. The books are balanced. The gift is complete. The Hawthorne dynasty died with him. The land was sold in parcels to pay debts. The great house burned in 1831, cause unknown, and was never rebuilt. Today, only foundation stones and a single scarred oak remain, whispering when the wind turns north. But the story did not die. It spread through slave quarters like holy fire, carried along the hush arbors and the Underground Railroad. Mothers told it to children who would one day walk to freedom. Preachers wove it into sermons about the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God. Because sometimes, in the darkest chapters of history, justice wears chains for a season, only to break them and return the gift. If the weight of this story sits heavy on your soul, share it. Hit the bell. Leave the name of your city below. Because somewhere tonight, the wind still carries 8 names through the pines, and judgment has a longer memory than any dynasty. The Hawthorne plantation died the way empires always die, slowly, then all at once. By midsummer 1823, the great house already looked haunted. White paint peeled in long strips like flayed skin. The once immaculate gardens choked with kudzu that seemed to advance overnight, as if the land itself had turned against its master. Creditors circled like buzzards. Former friends crossed the street in Charleston rather than nod to the colonel. And in the slave quarters, songs changed key. Minor chords now carried words no overseer could decipher, but every listener understood. Naomi, the old cook whose prayer circles had once begged for deliverance, no longer prayed. She commanded. From her kitchen, still the beating heart of information, she ran lines that stretched from the rice fields of Georgetown to the docks of Savannah and north along secret rivers of black humanity that white maps never acknowledged. Messages moved in quilt patterns, in the spacing of corn rows, in the rhythm of spirituals sung at dusk. Every plantation within 50 miles felt the tremor. Tools vanished, wells fouled, cotton gins jammed with sand poured in the dead of night. Overseers woke with their boots laced together or their horses mysteriously shooed backward. No one saw the hands that did it. Everyone knew whose wrath it was. Colonel Elias Hawthorne spent fortunes he no longer possessed trying to dam a tide that had already turned. New guards, bloodhounds, a stockade that cost more than 3 years of cotton profits. Every measure only proved the point the Eight had made when they walked out of the annex. Iron bends, spirits do not. And still the packets kept arriving in the north. One landed on the desk of David Walker in Boston. Another reached Angelina Grimke's hands in Charleston before she fled south to South no more. A third was read aloud in a London parlor while the Duchess of Sutherland gasped and ordered her Caribbean investments sold by morning. Each packet bore the same watermark, a crude charcoal cross identical to the one painted in Arabella's blood on the annex wall. By autumn, the planter aristocracy did what cornered men always do. They closed ranks and sharpened knives. They would sacrifice Hawthorne to save themselves. Invitations were rescinded. Loans called. At the Charleston Club, men who once toasted his wedding now spoke of him in the past tense, as if he had already been buried. He understood the sentence. On the morning of January 3rd, 1824, Elias Hawthorne gathered the last of his household staff in the crumbling parlor. Dust drifted through shafts of winter light like ash. The portrait of Arabella still hung above the mantel. Her painted eyes followed him the way real ones no longer could. Creditors' seals already decorated the furniture. Auction tags fluttered like prayer flags of defeat. He did not beg forgiveness. Southern gentlemen do not beg. Instead, he spoke for 3 hours. He laid every document on the long mahogany table. Arabella's journals, the franchise agreements with planters from 3 states, ledgers showing which judges had been promised shares of increased yields in exchange for looking away. He named sheriffs who took bribes in land, preachers who blessed the experiment from pulpits bankrolled by its future profits, legislators who drafted loopholes wide enough for hell to ride through. And then he told the part he had never meant to survive the telling. Cordelia had not died in the annex. They had kept her alive for 9 days. 9 days in which the family, using her own instruments, her own schedules, her own clinical precision, walked her through every stage of the Voss Protocol she had designed. Isolation, sensory deprivation, competitive punishment turned inward until the mind begged for the whip just to feel something real. They forced her to compete against herself, perform or watch the portrait of her own younger, innocent face be cut from its frame and burned strip by strip. They read her diary entries back to her in the voices of the children she had tried to unmake. On the 9th morning, they carried her, barefoot and silent, to the punishment chair one last time. Mama Ruth opened the Bible she had kept hidden all winter and read from Deuteronomy 32. I will render vengeance to mine enemies, and will reward them that hate me. I will make mine arrows drunk with blood. They did not strike her. They simply left her there, wrists and ankles locked, with water just out of reach and a single mirror angled so she could watch herself die of thirst while the house around her burned. When Hawthorne's men finally arrived, only the chair remained among the ashes, charred, empty, the leather straps neatly cut. That was the confession. He finished speaking as the sun bled out across the marshes. Then he dismissed the household, walked to the old live oak where wedding silk had once hung, and hanged himself with the same crimson sash Arabella had worn the day she became mistress of 8 human souls. The dynasty was ash by February. Creditors picked the bones. The great house burned, some said by accident, others by hands that left no prints. The land was parceled and sold to men who plowed under the quarters and planted over the graves. Within a generation, even the name Hawthorne was spoken like a curse. But names are not the only things that endure. In the hush arbors of Georgia, in the brush meetings of Virginia, in the secret churches beneath the floorboards of Charleston, mothers still taught their children a new beatitude. Blessed are those who were given as gifts, for theirs is the kingdom of reckoning. The intelligence lines Naomi and David Kane had woven never broke. They carried fugitives north long after the colonel's confession became abolitionist scripture. They fed John Brown information about Virginia arsenals. They guided Harriet Tubman on paths the bloodhounds never scented. And when Sherman's army finally marched through Beaufort County in 1865, Black soldiers rode ahead, burning plantation houses with a list in their saddlebags. Names taken from packets postmarked 40 years earlier, watermarked with a simple charcoal cross. The site of Hawthorne Hall is forest now. Only foundation stones remain, half swallowed by resurrection fern. But on certain nights when the moon is thin and the wind moves north to south, hunters say they hear singing, 8 voices in perfect harmony, moving through the trees without breaking a twig. Sometimes a woman in green silk is seen walking the old carriage road, searching for something she lost. She never finds it, because the gift was returned. With interest, and the books, dear viewer, are still not closed. If this story carved itself into your bones the way it did mine, do 3 things right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where the truth is landing tonight. Share this with someone who needs to feel the weight of real history. And subscribe, because the ground beneath America is crowded with stories that never stayed buried, and we are only getting started. The ashes remember, and sometimes when the wind is right, they speak.